Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their firsts. I'm your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you're an interesting person in IT, do let us know. You might be the next first person. The next voice you will hear will be today's guest. He is Linus Hakansson. Enjoying a stellar career, Linus is a chief product officer focused on helping his customers control APIs, events, and agents. Linus is definitely one of the most interesting people in IT, and we're delighted to have him as a guest on First Person. So, Linus, welcome. And first of all, what's the first thing people should know about you?
I think you just said it, Matt, to be honest. I'm someone that is very invested into who I work for and what I do when I wake up and go to work. So the fact that I'm the chief product officer at Gravity, helping create products in this amazing market with AI and everything that comes around it in terms of the challenges, that's the main thing.
It's certainly a pretty interesting time to be in this industry and in this particular part of the industry, right? And I think hunting for value, particularly for your customers in the space of AI, is a pretty cool place to be, I would say. So, excellent. Looking forward to this. Let's move to section 1, which we call First Things First. And this is where, Linus, we get to know about our guest by understanding some of their first times. So please, if you would, can you tell us something about your first job in this industry?
Yeah, sure. So after university, I had the pleasure of working as a developer. I always knew that I was going to go into technology since I was a kid. I'm sure we'll get to that as well. But my first real job after university was as an Android developer, so a mobile application developer at Sony Mobile. So that was amazing. I really got to learn, how it was working for a big company, what it was like developing things that actually are put into people's hands in terms of consuming electronics. And I was extremely lucky, and I'm sure we'll come to that. Luck has been something that has been prevailing all through my career, to be honest, in terms of timing. Because within a year of being a developer, someone came and said, "Hey, Linus, we're going to do a project on this thing called the cloud and Amazon Web Services, and we don't know anything about it in the company. And why don't you have a go at it?" So I've been very lucky to kind of been put into timelines and just being at the right place at the right time in terms of market evolution. But yeah, first real job, uh, Android software developer for Sony Mobile.
I mean, I love that you talk about luck. I mean, in my mind, I think luck is winning the lottery, right? Good fortune is being in the right place at the right time, but being able to take advantage of it, because there was a reason why they came and spoke to you about cloud, right? There was something about the way you worked that suggests that you were able to take that on. But I'm really interested as well. Like you said, you always knew, or you knew when you were at school, that technology was the industry for you. I'm wondering about that. How did that happen? Where did that come from, do you think?
So when I was born, my dad was a developer. So growing up, I think I got my first probably C# book or something, C++ book when I was 7. And my dad helped me start, coding in Visual Basic when I was 6, 7. So I remember my first couple of years in elementary school, bringing my friends over and actually trying to develop, software games and that sort of stuff. So I always knew that, that's what I wanted to do. So all my summer jobs, when I, grew up through elementary school, was always at my dad's place, getting his colleagues to teach me binary, probably when I was like 11, 12 years or something like that. And yeah, that's always been the path for me.
Interesting. That's so cool, and not something you hear very often, actually, I have to say. But then you've managed to kind of marry that to the business and product side, right? Like which I think is a really important part of anyone's development. I'm interested in how you got from. So you're at Sony. They're asking you to take a look at this new cloud thing. How does one go from there to building product for the organization you work
Yeah.
for?
Yeah, it is a very good question. And I think I remember being tasked with building this architecture up for something that was via B2C sort of service and storing end user data. So it was a very sensitive sort of architecture that I built up without any real experience in that area. So I remember having one of the very senior people from the headquarters at Sony Mobile Entertainment or Sony, whatever network entertainment system, I think it's called, the PlayStation division, flying over from HQ in the US to Sweden, and me walking through that person, the architecture. I remember being so nervous of, completely messing it up, but it got his stamp of approval. But then after that, I was also almost by luck. I was headhunted by Oracle to become a solutions engineer. Did that for 3 years. Went into consulting for a few years, and then really really missed selling solutions. And I think ultimately that's what I'm still doing. So at my current position as a chief product officer, not only do I actually have responsible for solutions engineering, I actually the value proposition to technical audiences on why our platform helps their life become easier.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I do in a product role as well, right? I build things because I know what these different roles need, right? I was there myself once, so I think it's not been that much of a jigsaw sort of career path. I think solutions engineering and being someone that builds and decides what to build from a product perspective ultimately is about how end users work with technology and solve problems.
Definitely, solving problems is. I mean, it's right there in the title, right? Solutions, and I think it's interesting when we have these conversations. When you talk to successful people, they've almost exclusively been able to marry technical ability and knowledge and curiosity with solving actual real world problems. We all know those people who are technically brilliant, but not necessarily working in the most effective solutions kind of thing. So I think to your point, it makes total sense to follow that path, right? And it definitely makes sense for you. And obviously along the way, you've been headhunted, you've been asked to take on this this architecture work. You've had the seal of approval from the senior person within the corporation. Like they're all confidence boosts, right? They must make you realize that you're good at the thing, but also you kind of need people to help you. And I'm wondering if there were any sort of great bosses and mentors along the way that helped you kind of make these transitions and developments.
100%. I've been very fortunate to work for really, really good bosses, all since my first job to where I am today, where I followed my current boss and the CEO, Rory, from our previous
Uh-huh.
kind of journey together at Snaplogics. I worked for him now for probably 6 years. But one person I do want to highlight is I think boss's job is to make sure that you're successful.
Mhm.
Someone that is a mentor and potentially without any selfish gain help you in your career progression, or even more worthy to kind of point out. So that's one person that comes to mind. When I joined Oracle, I've just been 2 years into my career working for Sony, going into this more cloud architecture, and then landing my first solutions engineering role or pre-sales role at Oracle. Coming into Oracle, this was in 2015. I was hired there to kind of help work with their traditional software, technology software products, WebLogic, Web Center, these sort of solutions that probably been around for 20 years or so, which also meant that early in my career, I had to compete with very senior people at Oracle who'd been in these roles for, 25, 30 years selling these sort of technologies. So again, I was very fortunate to come into Oracle at a time where they were really pivoting the company towards the cloud and creating and building all these new cloud native products. And immediately I realized that I could spend 15 years here climbing the ranks trying to kind of get the experience of these very senior people, or I can really bet on becoming someone that really picks up the new sort of products and become the expert there. And I think within my second month, I was presenting one of those new solutions to some internal people at Oracle. And one of those person was a person called Ewan at Oracle. He was very senior at Oracle. He'd been in this position through acquisitions and been there for many, many years. And when he watched that presentation for myself, he reached out immediately after and said, "Look, that was one of the best presentations I've seen since I joined Oracle. And what are you doing next week? Because I'm working in a team that travels all across the world to enable the local teams to sell these new products, basically.
Right.
So next week I'm going to be in Italy, and I'm going to running a session there. It would be fantastic if you could kind of help me and support me doing so." They basically took me under his wing.
Yeah.
I think after the first time, he said, "Look, I'm going to make it my mission to get you into the senior team that I'm working in, basically. And there was obviously no necessary gain for him, but he
Yeah.
kind of really mentored me and kind of made me navigate the big enterprise that is Oracle and how to be successful there. So I've got a lot of things to thank him for. I think he really helped, probably accelerating my career by 5 or 6 years or something like that.
It probably helps. I mean, this is the thing about being a good boss, right? And it's something I think we all have to learn and develop in our own practices. That selfless act will have benefited him and his team because you were good at what you did, right? And part of the responsibility of being a leader is recognizing talent and putting it in the right place. But yeah, very cool because not everybody does act in such a selfless manner. So it's good to call out, I think. Amazing. What a great start to our conversation, Linus. I'm really enjoying myself. But I'm enjoying myself too much. So we're going to move to section 2 now, which is what we call first fails, because we are not only here for the good stuff. We do learn more from our mistakes, and quite frankly, I get bored hearing about success stories. So, Linus, would you please be able to tell us about the first big mistake? Maybe there's a mistake that you kind of lie awake at night worrying about, or more often, actually, it's a thing that you learn from. But do you have one of those in the locker?
Yeah, I'd say I'm sure there's been tons of mistakes. I'm sure I'm doing them every day, to be fair with you. Um, Luckily enough, not any mistakes that I'm laying awake, kind of pondering about. But after Oracle, I think I got a little bit too caught up in chasing the money, basically,
Right.
and wanting something that was, oh, I want to do this because I think here's more money in this, or it's going to make my life easier because maybe there's a better trade-off in terms of allowed to being more close to an office, whatever it might be. So I did went into consulting for two different fairly big firms, and I got a salary increase. I probably got to spend more time out of work doing other stuff, but I found that that's not what I enjoy doing. I'm someone that needs to be extremely motivated by fighting, basically, whether that is to you know build a better product than a competitor or to sell something in a more effective way than someone else does. And I didn't really feel at consulting that I had those for me. And also, I'm someone that always needs to be challenged and almost be on the verge of, I don't want to say working too much, but it's definitely the most stressed out I've ever been in my career when I wasn't stressed at all,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's a position I found myself in, and really quickly had to change the sort of environment that I was working in.
So in a sense, the mistake was the career choice, but then I guess you learned from that. And I think it is interesting, right? This question of balance, because I love the way you phrased that. The most stressed I've ever been was when I wasn't stressed, kind of thing. I think it's for some people, at certain points of their career, it is perfectly fine to have a transactional relationship with work, right? We can't all always be inspired every day, but equally, it's important to recognize where you get your energy from. And if you're fortunate enough to put yourself in the right place, it's amazing, how much more fulfilling that can be. And I guess that fits into another question we like to ask, but I'm going to ask you anyway, just in case we get anything else. But I think as we develop and mature, sometimes we find that things we were really sure and certain of aren't the truth. In this case, you're talking about maybe your motivation wasn't quite what you thought it was around money and time. But is there a first time you realized something you thought you knew that might actually turn out not to be the case?
What I would say is that going into a leadership and a managerial role,
Yeah,
managing quite a few number of people, as an individual contributor, I almost looked at that as, look, I'm going to be able to be in a position where I don't have to work every evening or every weekend because I actually got a team that can help me do that. I
yeah,
think that's probably the biggest misconception that I've ever had about going into leadership and a managerial position. So I think being an individual contributor before going into leadership, that's kind of how I viewed it a little bit.
yeah,
It's going to be potentially an easier, smoother path, um, but it's not.
yeah. No, completely. I always remember appraising a colleague who really wanted to get into sort of next step. But and I remember him saying, I want the office and I want the salary. I just don't want to do the work. Uh, and it always sticks with me because I completely agree. Right, we get promoted because we're a really good individual contributor. But when we're managing other people, because we've been promoted, you're responsible for all of them being a really good individual contributor, and they're all different. So it becomes like it's not only, you know, that many more things to worry about. It's exponential because you've got to figure out how to support different people in different ways. I think that's a really good thing to call out because I suspect everybody has that experience at a certain point in their career, and it's a really good thing to learn and learn quickly, ideally. Um,
And I think here, I'm sure it's similar to a lot of companies, but here at Gravity, whenever a manager is being having their appraisals, we do twice a year appraisals, and looking at the performance on a manager, they inherit all the performance from their team effectively. So they can think that I'm showing up at time, I'm working professionally, I deliver this over here. Well, if your team is not operating in that manner, that is going to be reflected on you as a manager, right? So that, as you said, it becomes an exponential performance requirement for you as a
yeah.
leader.
Well, it's accountability, right? Like, and I think that's a really, really useful thing. And honestly, I've witnessed it in corporations where that hasn't been taught, and maybe it isn't always explicit to people. I remember again another training session very early on, which really stuck with me, where everybody was asked to draw an org chart of their team, and everybody draws like that, right, with themselves at the top, and the HR person just turned them all around and was like, "This is how you should think about it, right? At this point, your responsibility and the way you're judged is on the output of these people that you've put at the bottom, but are actually like at the top and need the most support," kind of thing, which is really simple and obvious. Wasn't obvious to me as somebody who would like excelled as an individual contributor. So again, I think it's quite a wise thing to call out, Linus. So I appreciate that. Okay, I think we've probably had enough trawling for disaster and failure, and you've really let us down there, Dennis, because these are all good learnings and successes that you've had. So let's move to section 3, which we call quick fire firsts. This is where we want to get to know you beyond your professional veneer. So let's find out about you as a real person using something I've personally developed, our random question generator. So if you could, Linus, please pick a number between 1 and 14.
1 and 14. Well, let's go in the middle. Let's go 7. Hopefully that's a lucky
Number
number.
7. Okay, this is. Let's see what we get from this. You're in your office. You find a dusty old lamp. You rub it, and a genie pops out. What's the first thing you would wish for from the genie? And you cannot wish for infinite wishes.
Oh, well, if I can, obviously, health is the most important thing, right? I've always been very fortunate in my personal life to kind of have the health with me. And I think that's sometimes something I reflect about in terms of career wise, other people that, have sick family members, friends, or themselves being sick. What a massive career impact that must have had in terms of priorities, in terms of time. I'm able to spend time in your career, and I've been extremely blessed, knock on wood, to not be in that situation that much. So that is the number one thing I would wish for, health and health really for my immediate family, friends, and obviously myself as well, because it is almost a precursor for having any type of career, and or at least having a smooth sailing career.
Well, I was. It's a really good point, and it makes me think of a couple of things. Um, the one is like as an individual, you never know. We all think of ourselves on our best day, right? We rate our own performance as if we're like a robot and we're always excellent. But you never know what's going on with anybody, right? Like in terms of their own health, their family. To your point, you know, uh, they might have a pet that's ill, right? And rationally, that's not going to impact work performance, but it might, right? And then I think about it from an organizational perspective. What you just described is a really untapped talent pool, right? There will be people who are struggling to commit to work in the way you described about your own career, and I'm certainly been the same for reasons outside of work. And we talk about this sometimes in the context of outside of amazing countries like Sweden, in the context of parenting and the gender gap and how that is just a massive. It just creates untapped talent. But actually, there's a health thing there, right? When people who maybe have chronic illness or illness within their family, could be supported to be useful and successful in senior roles, maybe with just a different work-life balance. But that can't happen if it's not seen, right? And it's not thought about and proactively.
100%.
Okay, let's go for another one then. That was a really interesting answer. Give me a number between 1 and 14 that isn't 7.
Let's give 3 then. Let's do 3.
Number 3, can you tell me something about, I mentioned this before, a first pet? Have you ever had a pet? Can you tell me something about that?
Probably not the question I
Aggressive
should have
question.
had. I've not had a lot of pets. I remember my first one was a cat called Lady. I think I probably had her at my grandmother's, and then I had two rabbits. One called, I
Oh,
think,
there you go.
Roberta, and one Ronaldinho or something like that, from inspired by football player names. Wasn't my thing. So I actually do not have any pets at the moment. My family do not have any pets. I always wished for a dog when I was a kid, but yeah, first one would be a cat. I actually did have is it called a walking stick? Is that a thing? Is that an
Okay,
English way to
yeah.
say it? Like one of those? Yeah, yeah, yeah. But unfortunately, it escaped in a forest as I was taking it out to enjoy the woods. And it was not too easy to find it, to be honest. But yeah, those would be the ones.
I'm interested in the names, obviously. Ronaldinho, yeah, okay. I know who that is. Who's Roberto? Who's Roberto named after?
So I think it was a female, so I had it to name it
Roberta.
Roberta, but I wanted to name it after Roberto Baggio, the Italian
There you go.
striker,
Yeah.
in the 90s. But unfortunately, well, I'm not sure if it mattered that much, but yeah, I had to make it a female name, so I had a spin on it.
Well, I'm getting a sense of the kind of football you like, at least. You're definitely after a flair player in the number 10 role, I guess, just behind the forward. And you're not averse to extravagant hair, in the case of both Ronaldinho and Roberto. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Excellent.
Excellent. And
Okay.
you can see the Ronaldo-inspired haircut I currently have in the original R9.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do what we can with what we've got. Right. That's how it goes. Excellent. Okay, we always get something from those questions. Doesn't always follow quite a straightforward path. So let's move on to section 4, which is what we call first and final thoughts. And I'm really interested to ask you, Linus, actually, from what we know of you, for the first piece of advice you would give to someone who is just starting out.
Yeah, that is a very good one. I think if I look back at my career, as I've said in the beginning, I've been very fortunate to be able to come into companies, quickly realize gaps in terms of, here's where the market is moving, here's where the current expertise and experience is in existing kind of staff in the organization. How can I make myself potentially leapfrog some of that experience? Because I've always been wanting to not have to chase experience. I've always wanted to find a way, how can I make myself one of the most experienced people in the company, even though I'm a junior person historically. So I think being able to reflect over, what is actually happening, whether it's in the macro market or in niche segments of different markets in technology, what is happening here? What have been some of the latest, evolvements over the last couple of years or months? And how can I put myself in a position to really piggyback on that? So if you're looking today, obviously the main one is AI. If you're a junior person, starting out of university or first couple of years in your career, and you want to really, accelerate your career progression, really make a name for yourself, I think you have to think about, what are some of the roles or companies or markets that are going to be massively impacted by AI. And you could probably, if you're a junior person, if you're still in university, you could probably spend a few weekends learning about some of, AI tooling, AI capabilities, having an opinion on something, and then going into almost any organization in the world now and position yourself as, look, this is what I have, this is what I know. I've had an opportunity to invest some of my time, which you haven't had because you're having to deal with, I don't know, being a manager, leading a team, and you can spend your time, learning what's actually came in the last 3 months. So that's what I would do. I would really look, how can I use the existing technology and market developments to leapfrog some of the experience
Yeah.
and kind of seniority in an organization to really kind of propel my career that way.
I think, I mean, it's excellent advice, but I also think what I'm hearing is you're solving problems again, right? You're looking for solutions. Because a manager of mine many years ago once said to me, and I asked the same question: how do I get on? How do I sort of, develop my career? And she said, well, first of all, do your job, right? But the second thing is look around, get context, and understand what problems the company is trying to solve for its customers and for itself, and then figure out how you can add value there. And I think, I hear some of that in what you're saying there, which is taking AI as the obvious example. Yeah, it's going to disrupt the workforce, right? It's going to take some skills, some processes. They're just not going to exist in future. But there's still a need for problems to be solved using that technology. And I think, what you're talking about there is just take yourself seriously enough to understand what those problems are, where the solutions are going to be sought, and put yourself in a position to add value and support that process. It's very good advice. Um, and I think maybe I know the answer to this as well. But if you're talking to somebody about your career, what's the first project or achievement that you'd want to tell people about? What is Linus's masterpiece?
It is a very good question. I'd say, so after university, in the last few weeks of my studies, before I was going into my first job, I felt, okay, well, I want to apply for a job in engineering, to be a developer, probably an Android developer, working on mobile phone. That was the smartphones had just come about. So I said, well, I probably need to create some sort of hobby project to kind of showcase myself to my first kind of employer. So there's this thing very popular in Europe, for those that are interested in football, called Fantasy Premier League, which is basically the English Premier Leagues. Well, I mean, in the US, it's a big thing around the fantasy football, right? So the equivalent here in Europe. And at that time, there wasn't too many sort of tooling or ecosystem around that community, even though it had millions of players. So I built one of the first, and I think the first ever sort of fantasy Premier League assistant mobile application that basically helped, figure out what teams you should rotate different players with, and who might be an undervalued player and that sort of stuff. And I earned a little bit of money in those, that month, that season actually. And it was definitely something I was quite proud of for a few years, as that kind of existed and had its own life beyond my normal career. So that's probably my I'm not sure what the Latin word for is, but it's probably the first. I was quite proud of that for quite
Yeah,
a
of
few
course.
years. One of the most I remember is still to this day, after probably my first year at Sony, building applications for consumer mobile phones, going into one of the retailers in Sweden, where you can actually buy phones, like a phone house or something like that. And on the day of the release,
Yeah,
you'll be able, I'm not sure if you still are, but you can actually play around with the phones in this kind of preview mode and actually seeing my own
yeah,
applications that I've developed myself with my team. That experience, like going into a store, seeing something for the first time in your career that you've actually helped building and taken design decisions on,
yeah,
that's also something I don't think I've ever been so kind of proud of something career wise.
yeah.
So
Of
those
course.
are probably the two ones. Maybe a bit sad that those were the first things I did in my career, and it's just
Not at
been
all.
downhill from there. But yeah, that's what I picked.
The show's called First Person, right? You don't get that first time back. I definitely remember the first time I was published in a magazine that was on sale in the shops, and basically going into every shop I could to see it in there. And the cool thing about, I mean, amazing to do the fantasy league thing. I need to use that. Not so much on my soccer fantasy league, but definitely on my NFL one. I need the assistance. But the cool thing about software, right, is you made something from nothing and it became a thing. Right, that is so cool. So I think that's the very opposite of sad. Actually, I think they're amazing masterpieces. Okay, sadly, we come to our final question, which is our only non-first question, and it's an unfair question. But before we leave, Linus, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
Final thoughts. Not sure I do, to be honest. I think we covered all of it
Yeah,
pretty well in terms of. I think the one that I really think about is, even I'm now in a position, I've now, what, how many years have I've been in this? I've been 13 years into my career, and I very much look at AI as, is this how I get leapfrog? Is this how someone comes in and, hey, I'm straight out of university, but I'm going to be able to do a better job than you are, Linus, because I have all this tooling, I have all this knowledge on AI and how to use that in an organization that's going to make you obsolete. And I think that's something that it doesn't make me scared. It makes me super motivated, basically,
Yeah.
because I think that's probably been. I'm just guessing here, but over the years, over 50 years, 60 years, 30 years ago, I think if you're a senior person in an organization, I guess you become quite comfortable because you know that there's no way someone would just come in here and replace all your experience and all your hard work and knowledge like that. But I think we're now in a situation where that is becoming a reality. So that's amazing if you're in the beginning of your career. And then it could be amazing because it can really drive and aspire you and make you learn things that you didn't maybe want to learn if you're kind of in my phase of your career or later. But I think it's very, very exciting times.
Yeah. Well, look, what's really interesting there, Linus, is most people frame that as it's a terrible time to come into the world of work, right? Most people I hear, they're saying, "Oh, it's really difficult for young people because AI is taking their jobs." Whereas, and I think you're right. Like, it's about opportunity. It's about, if you've worked in media and publishing as I have for the past 30 years, it's been a constant industrial revolution, and so you what you describe about people feeling comfortable perhaps hasn't been the case, although the change is accelerating rapidly. But I think in technology, it definitely has been the case, right? Like things have been pretty stable since the era of cloud, certainly. But I think, you know, if you've got the right mindset, and it comes back to this thing that, a theme you've hit on multiple times in different ways, finding solutions, right? If you're adding value, if you're doing something that's really useful, if you understand the problems to be solved, like AI is an enabler and it's going to enhance your ability to do that, which is opportunity for everybody, but definitely opportunity for people who are coming into the workforce. So I think that's a really positive message and a great message. And I appreciate you. Appreciate you saying that. So my thanks to you, Linus Hakansson, and thank you for watching or listening to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their firsts. I have been your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you are an interesting person in IT, do let us know. You might be the next First Person. My thanks to our guest, Linus Hakansson. Thanks to you for watching, and goodbye.